Okay, so we had to switch up a few things, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. It's a little staticky. I'm not for sure what's happening, but hopefully that doesn't bother you guys too bad. Okay. Okay, so if you're here to learn a little bit, collab, talk, discuss about the intersectionality of disability and race. So my name is Whitney Wood Gaines. A little bit about myself. I'm a special education teacher. I've been teaching for only 5 years. So in the grand scheme of things, I'm still pretty early on. I teach in Columbus, Bartholomew Consolidated School Corporation. I'm part of the union in Columbus, and that's how you reach me. I'm not sure my clicker is not working, so we'll do it like this. Okay, so what qualifies me on this topic? So in addition to being a licensed special education teacher, so my background is in social work, and so I worked for DCS for many years. I worked in the mental health field. I was a therapeutic foster parent for several years. We fostered many therapeutic children with special needs, and we adopted 2 of our girls through the foster care system. And I sit on the board of the ARC of Bartholomew County. So we are a subsidiary of the ARC of Indiana, which is a national organization that works with individuals with disabilities. And I founded Cordell and Friends, which is, you'll learn more about Cordell, but it's a nonprofit that I started where I work with minority families with disabilities. But I always say my most important qualification in this topic is, these are my 5 children. Aww. Yes. So that is my crew, and I always give credit to the photographer because I have no idea what type of Photoshop he used to make it look like we were all looking in the same direction at the same time, but I can promise you that is not how that was happening. Like, I was literally holding on to Cordell for dear life because he's just like kind of running around, and I was telling Emma, like, Emma, pull your shirt down, and Sabrina was like, ah! Yeah, and I was like telling Connor, like, Connor, take your hands out of your pants, like, and of course my oldest was like, why am I here? Yeah, so this is my 5, and I think it's always important to provide context because for me, this topic is personal, it's also professional, and it's so necessary, and it's a conversation that I'm very blessed and honored to be able to have. So I'm going to start out with a story. So Cordell, this is my baby. He is 12, and he was a micro preemie. So he was born at 24 weeks. He weighed 1 pound, and he has cerebral palsy. So he is nonverbal, and he spent 16 weeks in the NICU. It was one of those stories where, like, you didn't know you were pregnant until you're in labor. That was me with Cordell. So Cordell and my daughter are 6.5 months apart. So I went to the doctor with what I thought was kidney stones, and I left with the baby. Yeah. So that is Cordell, and Connor is my youngest. He is 8 and has ADHD, like the very, very squirmy ADHD. Courtney is my oldest, and then Emma and Sabrina are biological sisters. They experience significant physical, sexual, emotional abuse, like the kinds you hear about on TV. Luckily, we got Sabrina when she was 2, but Emma, unfortunately, was 6 when DCS got involved. So she had spent several years locked in a room. She was still drinking out of a bottle, pacifier, all of the things. So they both have autism, but as we know, autism can present very different. And depending on a lot of factors, autism can present very different. So because she had experienced so much more severe neglect and she was not receiving any services, like she hadn't been to a therapy, a school, a dentist, nothing, she is definitely more on the profound spectrum. So this story is interesting because Cordell and Emma are the same age. They actually have the same birthday. They went to the same school. We put Emma in school with Cordell. They were in the same class. And I love to tell this story because I think it really just puts in perspective. They had recently gotten a new teacher, and this teacher obviously did not know that I was Emma's parent. So I got a phone call, and they said, hey, we're calling about Emma. She was on the bus. She rides a special needs bus, and she got really overstimulated when all of the kids were being loud, and she reached down, she grabbed the aide, and she bit the aide on the arm, and it drew blood like it broke the skin. Freaking out. I leave school. Well, I said I'm leaving school, but they reassured me. They're like, everything is fine. Like, Emma's calm. She was just really overstimulated. They said, we love her. She will stay in the office with the office lady. They'll give her snacks. They'll give her the iPad. She can do her work. They were like, please don't leave. She'll be fine. I was so grateful. 27 days later, yes, I know, specific dates, I got a call from the school, and it was the principal. And he said, hey, Mrs. Gaines. Segue, Cordell's been in, he was at the same school since kindergarten, so he's in 4th grade. Emma was new to the school. They said, Cordell, you have to come pick him up. Like, he assaulted a student. He's being kicked out. And I'm like, are we talking about the same kid? So I was freaking out. I asked what happened. They said that he was on a slide. They were, and they're in a life skills class. There was a girl in front of him, and when kids climb to the top of the slide and then change their mind? Mm-hmm. Well, that's just what happened. But Cordell assumed that the girl wanted help going down the slide, so he just helped her. And she did not like it at all. So they said that he was being kicked out for assault, and that we had to do some safety planning before he could return, and all of the things. And so I picked him up, we went home, but then you really start to think, and then you start to replay previous conversations. And at this time, I just started teaching. So I'm like replaying all of these things, and I am hearing common language. And I'm like, man, they love Emma. Like, they've never said that Emma's violent. And she's kind of violent, right? Like, it's not her fault, but she's a biter, she's a hitter, she's a grabber. She was nonverbal until very recent. So now she has selective mutism, but her recourse is she gets very overwhelmed, and she's a grabber and a biter. But they've never described her in that way. They even reference, like, she just reminds me of my daughter. She reminds me of my granddaughter. She reminds me of somebody. Cordell, fortunately, he has had the benefit to have 2 parents in the home. When I had Cordell, I was able to stop working right away, devoted every day, my whole everything to making sure he had what he needed. He was able to partake in every type of physical, emotional, water therapy, horse therapy, sleep therapy. If it was offered, my son had it. He's a very happy child. As long as he has an iPad and some applesauce, he does not have a care in the world. So I really started to think, like, what is the difference? Like, what is it about my son that would even make you use that terminology? Like, he's never been violent. He's not aggressive, right? So then I started to think, like, I don't even believe the school was aware. So when I brought it to their attention, they were met like almost defensive, like, what are you saying? And I'm like, I don't even think you're aware of your language. I don't think you're aware of the biases that exist. Because unfortunately, when you see my son, before you see he has a disability, you see that he's a Black boy. Yeah. So it's just easier to see him from a certain lens, if that makes sense. And the second story is my son Connor. So he goes to a Spanish, a dual language immersion program. He's very cute. He's bilingual. And he is very squirmy. He's always been squirmy. He's just squirmy. But part of that is, like, he has always grown up with Cordell. So he is very paternal. He is very smart. He is very much like caretaker, tells everybody what to do. Because in his little brain, like, he parents Cordell. So when he started kindergarten, he struggled. Like, he would get so frustrated if somebody would say the wrong answer. Like, he would want to correct them. If somebody wasn't following the rules, he would need to know why they're not getting consequences. And so they asked if they could do an evaluation. And I said, of course, because, who doesn't love evaluations? And so they did an evaluation. And they said, we need to give a diagnosis to provide services. And they listed off all of his symptoms. They said inattentiveness, hyperactive, he's kind of impulsive. And what do you think their recommended diagnosis was for him? No. ODD, which is a conduct disorder. And for all those who don't know, ODD is overdiagnosed in Black and brown communities, even though his symptoms were very standard for ADHD. So when I brought that up, because I'm a SED teacher, so I knew what words to use, they said, okay, we can see that. And so he has ADHD. And so I thought that was so important because I had the privilege to know the words. I had the privilege to know what to look for. I had the privilege to know what not to look for. But so many of our families, our colleagues do not know. Okay, so one of the things, it's a little sad, I wanted to go back to is, yes, there are laws put in place that are specifically designed to support all students with disabilities. And they reference that a lot. The terms that when this law was put into place, it was for all students is what they tell us. All students, every trainee, all students, when they reference the IDEA, which is the Individual or Disabilities Education Act of 1975. But what they do not reference, or they seem to forget, is that this is what was happening to us in 1975. Right. We were still trying to be integrated into schools. So this is a particular picture. Her name is Valerie Banks. She was going to a school, I believe in Boston, and the judges had to force the school to allow her to come. So the reaction was that the parents pulled their kids out, and the teacher. So this was a photo that was taken with the student who was finally able to be integrated, but no one wanted to teach her. And so when people say there are laws put in place to benefit all students, I often reflect that when these laws were put in place, they were not designed with us in mind. These laws were specifically put in place because people in positions of authority who were the majority didn't want their own children to be othered. And they noticed that their children, because disabilities do not discriminate. Systems discriminate and people discriminate. So the majority saw that, wait a second, I don't want my kid to be othered. I want my kid to be able to participate. So when you're in positions of power and authority and you can shape policy and legislation, we are able to have these laws. But make no mistake about it, these laws were not put in place with us in mind. We were in survival mode when these laws were put in place. So, since I'm talking to peers, we know that the system is broken, right? So I don't have to pull up a lot of data to show you that the system is broken. This is a safe space. The system is broken. We know that our Black and brown children are overly diagnosed for emotional disabilities. They are underdiagnosed for things like autism, ADHD, overly diagnosed for conduct disorders. We know that they are 4 times more likely to be expelled than their non-Black counterparts. We know these things, right? Yeah. But now what? One of the important things is I always say you have to be in the game to win. And I reference the fact that we know that the system is broke. There's holes in the system when it comes to meeting the needs of our Black and brown children. But we also know that the alternative for many of our kids without IEPs is expulsion. And when they are not in the schools, they're out of the game. Yeah. Like the schools do not have to be accountable for them. They don't have to be responsible to make sure they're going to make up this time, make sure they're going to make up this information. And then sometimes children, like we have miracles in the group, but more likely than not, when kids are expelled and they come back, they do not recover. Yeah. They just do not recover. And then they become othered, but in a whole different category, where the schools do not have to be accountable for these kids. So no, we don't encourage kids to have IEPs, but we do put it in perspective that a lot of the behaviors that kids who look like me are expelled for are the same emotional behaviors that other kids have IEPs for. Mm-hmm. And they do not get expelled. It is very difficult to expel a kid with IEPs. Trust me, I know. If there's any other sped teachers in the room, it is very difficult. Yes. Because sometimes we'll see the kid like, how is he still here? Like, he threw a chair, he threatened to blow the school. Like, what is happening, right? But that's so important that when you put it in perspective, like, 2 things can be true. The system can be broken, but when they're not even in the system, there's nothing we can do to support them. The next thing is learning different doesn't have to be a bad thing. An individual education plan just means that this student learns differently. And we're gonna provide accommodations and supports to support their learning. So we know that the way learning was created and designed was not created for us in mind. So we do know that our children oftentimes learn differently. They process differently, they identify differently, they respond differently in certain situations. We know this to be true. So when we're talking about what that means to need support, it could just mean you learn differently. I say some of the most amazing students I've had were kids on the spectrum. And I think some of them are clinically geniuses. Like, so smart. Oh my goodness. But given the wrong circumstance and environment, those kids can be really discriminated against. If you're not willing to see that different doesn't have to be bad. Different can be genius. Different can be unique. Different can be innovative, right? And so that's where I have the benefit of, I'm newer to the education space. So I started when COVID started. So I say the good thing though was I didn't have 20 years of experience in doing things. So I did not have to relearn everything that I already knew to be true. I started from a place of, we're just trying to meet people where they are and figure it out in real time. But we really had to be open to figuring out what works because we couldn't do what everyone else has always done. So we had no choice but to see what do these kids need and how can we meet that need. So the next thing is really take time to examine our own bias, trauma, and privilege. And it's always weird to talk about bias with people who are like-minded than me because I never saw myself as somebody with like significant biases. Like I feel like I've been woke my whole life, right? But when you really think about it, I reflect on being in spaces with my colleagues and we're talking about students and how we speak about those students, especially when we're in a place of frustration. We speak about them sometimes in a very biased way, like, oh, this kid is not gonna graduate. Like, oh, it's the mama's fault. Like, after we met the parents at the meeting, we know why the kid is bad, because the mama's a mess. Like, or the kid needs structure. This is why he's like this, because he doesn't have structure. Or I'll be lucky if he makes it to the next year. Like, we've all fallen trapped to those conversations. The important part is to be aware that that's a normal thing for us to make judgments about somebody. So if we're not careful, we won't even notice that we're doing it, right? Our own trauma, a lot of our families, when they're approached with, hey, we think your child should be diagnosed, especially Black and brown families, they're like, absolutely not.
I know, right?
I was that mom, right? You're right, listen, just say space. I was that mom because we have our own traumas. Like I remember my parents were like, absolutely not. They're like, they told me I was dumb in school. They told me I was gonna graduate. They put me in this class. I didn't have any friends. Like, don't let them do that to your baby. But that's a lot of our own traumas, right? We're used to being othered. So the idea of like othering others, like you wanna put them even in a smaller bubble than they already are in. Our parents have a lot of trauma when it comes to that. So they are sometimes very resistant to those initial conversations. And our privilege, right? I would have never thought I had a lot of privilege until I had to raise a child that could not speak. So until I had to raise a child that could not speak and could not communicate, I looked at the world completely different. Like, I can say, yes, I want something, no, I don't want something. I can explain something. If you offer me something and I don't want it, I can tell you why I don't want it. But I can tell you what I do want. I can tell you when something hurts, my likes, my needs. I have the words to use. And not only my son being nonverbal, a lot of the kids that we work with, they don't have the vocabulary to explain what they're feeling. They don't have the words. So they don't know what to say, so they either shut down or they turn up. They just don't have the words. So it's a privilege for me to be educated. It's a privilege for me to be able to give my children a better life. In the first session, I asked everybody, I go, we're not trying to get anybody's parents in trouble, but how many of us growing up, our primary form of discipline was whoopings? I say you get extra credit if it was switches, and I'm like, and if you got to pick your own, But when we think about it, that's just our one generation above us. So we weren't raised in an environment where we were encouraged to articulate ourselves, to explain, to talk about how we're feeling, what we need, what we're needing help with. We were not raised with that. So for me, the only difference is I was able to get an education. I was able to go to college. I was able to move my family to a better living environment, expose them to different things. I learned the word so I can ensure that I raise my children differently. But a lot of our families do not have that privilege. So they are raising their children in the same environment that they were raised in. And so they're inadvertently repeating those patterns because that's all that they know. Right? So it's important for us to understand our bias, our trauma, and our privilege. Learn to speak the language. Sped language is a real thing. And sometimes I talk with my parents before we're going to go to a meeting, especially if I think it's going to be contentious, and I'm like, okay, so this is what you say. Don't start yelling, don't start cursing, because as soon as you become emotional, and I know it sounds crazy, even the mom in me, but once you lose composure, you change how they respond to you. Because now they don't have to respond to you. They don't have to answer anything. They're just going to say, I'm so sorry that you're upset. While they're like calling the resource officer on the low. They don't have to answer your questions because they put you in a bubble of like, this parent is irrational. I don't have to explain. Plus, if you're articulating that your child is not angry, aggressive, while you are demonstrating similar behaviors, it sometimes gives us an out, right? Like we don't even have to answer for what happened anymore. Because mom is flown off, like she's going off, right? And so it's so important to speak the language, to know. So like when my son, when they kicked him out of school, I wanted to go in there, like forget this lanyard. Like, I'm about to go, because it's my son. And I'm like, you're not going to do this to my son. Like, I've worked too hard. You're not going to put my son in this box. Luckily, I calmed down between then and when I had a meeting. And I was able to use words that they understand. I used words like, what interventions were put in place to prevent this from happening? What was the safety plan? Because he has no body awareness. Most people with advanced cerebral palsy do not walk independently. He does. He's just wobbly. But you know this. This is in his IEP. So what safety plans were put in place before you let him get up there and push a girl down the slide? Like, what did you guys do to prevent this from happening? Right? So because I knew what words to use, it completely changed the conversation. But if I would have came in there like, y'all got me messed up. Like, y'all didn't sit here and let my kid potentially hurt this girl. Like, they would have just been like, I'm so sorry. But they would have been completely desensitized to my emotion. Because people see our emotion as anger, right? So it's so important to be able to speak the language. The last thing, which is so important, an educational diagnosis is not the same as a medical diagnosis. And a lot of our parents do not know that. And so that is so scary for them. Because they're like, so you've been writing up my kid every week. My kid doesn't think you like them. I don't think you like them. And now you want me to let you evaluate my kid. Absolutely not, right? But an educational diagnosis only states, does this child have some sort of need that will allow her to receive supports that can help her educationally or academically? It has nothing to do with their medical diagnosis. So there are students that have medical diagnosis, but not educational diagnosis. A lot of kids are on the spectrum. They don't need additional supports. Right? So that's so important that our parents know these things, especially our Black and brown parents understand that. I know it's scary when you get that letter, phone call, somebody's wanting to assess your child. It's not a medical diagnosis. And when it comes to this process, the parent is in the driver's seat if they know what to ask. Like, this is one of those situations where they get to control this process, but they need to know the language. Okay, so one of the things we talk a lot about is words have power. And this is so important because I know we've all had a student we've had to wrote them up, like an incident report or something. I would say there's nothing more dangerous than an angry teacher doing a write-up, especially if the kid just disrespected them. And now they have to write it. And I think what we miss, though, is that this is a legal document. The things we write in their student logs that we document, these things will follow these kids. So in the moment we're mad because we're like, the kid did whatever. And so we're using lots of like aggressive words, lots of exclamation points, because we're so frustrated because we do get to be human too. But we always have to keep in mind that unlike these kids, like we are on the other side of it. So we can say how mad we are at the kids. We can make all these assumptions about the type of future this kid will have. But we've already made it. But what we do know is that we can't give up on these kids yet because we've already made it. So we can say, oh, they don't want to do it anymore. I'm done trying. Like, I'm over it. I'm not trying with this kid. You can't give up on a kid in middle school. He's 12. His brain is not fully, I don't care how upset he's made you. You cannot give up on these kids because we're sitting from a position of privilege. It's easy for us to say that, but we know that if we give up on these kids, that might completely change the trajectory of their lives. So when we're writing, even when we're writing things to our principals, to our colleagues, especially when we're writing things that are going to go in their IEPs, we really have to be mindful of words. I work in a predominantly white school district. This is something I have to be very mindful of because the words that I use or the words that I allow other people to use, sometimes it just reaffirms biases they already had. So they were just waiting for me to co-sign. So once I co-signed, they're like, whew, I feel so much better because I always thought little Johnny was bad because he didn't have a dad, right? Like, you give them permission to co-sign the biases that already existed. So you have to be very intentional. So think about when we're saying that a student is aggressive, especially a black or brown student. Could it be they're aggressive or could it be that they're assertive? As a person of color, as a woman, as any type of minority, we've all been called aggressive. People call me aggressive just my tone.
Yeah. Your tone's your language.
Right. I talk with my hands. I have nonverbal children. I have autistic children. I'm a very eccentric talker because my son watches your mouth while you're talking. People will say, oh, her hands were in my face. I go, no, I talk with my hands. Right? So just be very mindful of was there aggressive or are they just being assertive? And it still gives you the opportunity to work with that student on what does it look like? Right? But when we're documenting, be very mindful of that. The kid was defiant. They were just defiant. Is it that they're defiant or that they're an independent thinker? Like they were really locked in on how they felt in that moment. So you weren't swaying their opinion one way or the other. Does that mean they were defiant or does that mean that they were really thinking independently? When we say they're angry, raise your hand if you've been called angry in this room. Yeah, more than once. Were they angry or were they agitated by something that was happening? Because angry, period, changes the way you define this child. They are angry. No, they're not angry. They might have been agitated by what happened. That puts it in context. They're not an angry child, but something happened and they reacted in an agitated fashion. They just couldn't let it go. I hear this a lot with our students, they just could not let it go. They wouldn't stop, they could not let it go. I'm or was what happened, they perceived it to be so significant that it really traumatized them. It was so significant. Perception is reality. We can say it's not a big deal, but we can't tell them what's going on in their 12, 13, 14-year-old brain. It might have been that big of a deal that it traumatized them. And now they're hyperfixated on it because it traumatized them. They're acting up or they're acting out. Or could they just be triggered by something that happened? Something happened, it triggered them, and that's why they are responding in that way. They just go off. And I'm but is that really what happened? Because we weren't just sitting there humming and they just started yelling and screaming. Or did they just react to something that happened? She just snapped. I heard this about this girl I went to school with. She just snapped out of the blue. I'm but did she really? Mm-hmm. Or did she get overstimulated in the moment? There was a situation where we had a teacher and she was say the girl's Stacy. She was Stacy, what's the answer? Did you do your homework? Stacy, what's the answer? And Stacy ignored her and she kept saying, Stacy. So some other people were raising their hands. She was no, I'm talking to Stacy. So she kept saying, Stacy, did you do your homework? After the 10th time, Stacey started screaming, and she was do not yell my name anymore. And she probably added a few more adjectives in there, right? The teacher then freaks out, says Stacey made her feel unsafe, Stacey threatened her, Stacey had the whole class scared. She just snapped. So I'm in the back, I'm a sped teacher, I'm sitting in the back, but is that really what happened though? Because that's not what I saw. I saw that you were poking with Stacey. And you kept poking with her. And she tried to kind of ignore it and think that you would be able to read the room, but you just kept poking, kept poking with her. She reacted, and then now you're in victim mode, right? And the last one is disrespectful. And that is similar to angry, right? If you say disrespectful, period, that changes how people look at this student. That makes them think, oh, they can't respond to authority. They don't listen to other people. I'm like, but is it that, or were they just being inconsiderate in the moment? In the moment, they were being inconsiderate of their peers, their teacher, their whoever, in that moment, right? And so I think it's so important because all of these words are used when they've talked about my daughter. They've never called her aggressive or violent. And I'd be kind of confused because she's kind of violent, right? Like, she bites and it hurts, like real teeth. But they've never called her that, ever. And they're very intentional to not call her that. And some of that is because we go back to the bias, meaning I understand that my bias is that I have a child that has a disability. So I always see, if I walk in a room, I will always see kids in the building that have a disability. I will always see kids that I constitute are outside the bubble. Like, I will always see, I grew up in a predominantly white town, so I know those kids that are outside the bubble. So my eyes will immediately go like, okay, here's everybody. I want to make sure that they see me. I also know that exists. So I need to make sure that is my personal bias, but I need to show up for everybody. That requires intentionality. Like, I know that there's a girl over there and she has Down syndrome, and I just want to hug her as soon as I go into class every single day. Because in my mind, people probably don't hug her enough. Mm-hmm. But I also need to make sure on my way over there to hug her, I talk to every other student. Because every student deserves for me to show up for them the same way. That requires intentionality. Like, we really have to do the work. And so, one of the things I always talk about is like shifting the power. Like, one of the words that we use in SPED learn. Is there any SPED teachers in here? One? Okay, so one of the words that we always use is what is the antecedent? Yes. The ABC. You guys might have been seeing, like, if they bring it to your room, like, we got to do these assessments for a kid. Yeah. So the antecedent just means what was it that caused the behavior? What happened right before the behavior occurred? And that is so important because it changes the context of everything. So when you, as a parent or even a teacher, when you're brought into the room and they're telling you what happened, they're not going to tell you what happened before. They're just going to be like, Mikey threw the chair. Like, he's got to go. He's angry, aggressive. I can't handle Mikey. Mikey's got to go. He was throwing chairs, cussing. But the problem is, like, what happened before he threw the chairs? Because I think that's when we see a lot of our kids, our black and brown kids, like, because they don't have the words, they struggle in these moments because they know that something happened before. They know why it happened. They know how they felt in that moment. And it might be fear, it might be it might be a lot of things, but they don't have the words to articulate it. So then they just become like a fly on the wall while people are discussing them. And they know that something happened that triggered. But then the same people that triggered them now get to minimize it. And so a lot of our kids, they really struggle in these spaces, and then you wonder why the behavior continues, right? It continues because as other peers, other colleagues, parents, we're not asking the right questions. What was the antecedent, right? So when you go to a meeting, I always tell my parents when they're going to a meeting, you need to ask what was the antecedent. Plus, we like using those SPED words because it keeps them on their toes, right? What was the antecedent? I get it, all of these things happen, but what led to it? Because one of the things that we have to do as special education teachers, we are required by law to find out what was the antecedent. And we are required to put things in place to support that antecedent, to minimize it from even happening. So our job is to know what causes them to struggle and to put things in place to minimize the likelihood that that's going to happen. Or to notice when they're being triggered so that we can jump on it as soon as it starts, so we don't let it get to this point. So I think it's so important, even for teachers, no matter if you teach SPED, if you work in the secretary's office, if you're a janitor, whoever it is that has bonded with this student or that knows this student and knows the words to use, and you see something, if you see something as a peer or colleague, it's okay to ask. And if for no other reason, if I have a janitor who comes up to me and like, man, I saw Susie get taken out, right? Like, what? I saw her get upset, but what happened before she got upset? If no other reason, that keeps me accountable immediately because he saw it. So now I have to justify what I did. So I'm like, and that is so important to be able to hold our peers accountable because we're on the same level. Students can't hold their teachers accountable, and they know that. They try. Doesn't usually work. But as a peer, as a colleague, it is okay for us to hold our colleagues accountable. If for no other reason, we want to protect the students, we want to protect our colleagues. Sometimes in the heat of the moment, we are humans. We are humans too. So in the heat of the moment, if we have a kid who's just poking and poking and poking and poking, if we're being honest, we might not have handled the situation the best. But if we don't have anybody that we have to answer to, if we don't have anybody that holds us accountable, nobody will ever know about it. We might think about when we go home like, yeah, I kind of did have to handle a little bit. But if we don't have anybody that can hold us accountable, we never will know, right? And so it's so important to be able to shift the power. What is the antecedent? And so here's some resources. And so because, I want us all to keep our jobs. And so when there's a family that comes into your school, and you might know them, right? Like they might be your neighbors. You might go to church with them. They might be a relative, and they're asking specific questions, right? Sometimes you can answer, but sometimes you have to keep your job, right? And so you can always refer them. There's a lot of resources. So this one is probably the most important. So InSource, I always refer this to families because InSource, they are specifically created to support families going through whether it's the diagnosis process, whether it's they're trying to suspend my kid, whether it's I don't feel like my kid is getting proper supports. And not only that, they can provide liaisons. So a liaison is literally like a right-hand man when you go into these IEP meetings. They are fantastic because sometimes you don't even have to say anything as the parent. The liaison comes in and they know all the sped words and they get to ask all of those hard questions and the school has to answer them. Legally, they have to answer them. They have to explain what happened, show me the documentation. You can't just kick my kid out. You just can't, especially if they have an IEP. You have to show me what you've been doing to work with them. And so it's so important to know that resources like this exist for our families and for ourselves.
So is this something that once they have their IEP, they can utilize them?
Yeah, before, during, after.
Okay.
Yeah, and sometimes even before, like sometimes as parents, like you see something, right? Like you see like maybe my child keeps getting in trouble, but I really think he just doesn't understand math. Like he only struggles in math. Like he's always getting kicked out of the class in math, only in math. And I try to talk to him about it and he's just like, oh, the teacher doesn't like me, whatever it is. But you start to see a pattern, like something's going on in math. It might be he's struggling in math. And so I wish sometimes parents or other teachers knew that he doesn't have to have a medical diagnosis to have an IEP. He could have an IEP because he struggles in math. But then it puts more onus on the teacher that now you know that he struggles with math. So now you guys have to put some extra supports in place to figure out why is he struggling in math? Is it that he just does he need to write it down? Does he need to listen to it? Does he need to have more time to turn in his assignments? Does he work better in a digital format than a written format, right? That's so important. And I think it helps empower teachers because if you truly love your job and you love the students, you want all of your students to be successful. So imagine if you knew that you could create an environment where all of your students had the same ability to be successful. And on the front end, it might require more work because you got to do a little bit of homework to try to really get to know your students. But after a while, like just that feeling of like, it took me a few minutes to pull up a different version of an assessment. Or I realized that Susie draws amazing and she sits in class and just writes poetry all day and she draws pictures. So Susie, draw me a picture about what you interpret chapter 2 to be for English. We're reading Romeo and Juliet. Write me a poem on what you interpret it to be. And that will be your assessment. She will probably ace that assessment. Instead of getting all these zeros, because you keep having her do all of these tests she doesn't want to do, but allowing her to do it in a way that allows her to feel productive, she will probably ace it. Which makes you as an educator feel better because you're meeting her where she is. And then it makes you feel like she knew it all along. I wasn't open to do it in a way that would benefit her. There's so many of our kids that fall through the cracks because we want them to fit in a box. And we have this box that the system has created, and our job is to get all of our kids to fit in this box. And so many of our kids fall through the cracks. A lot of them look like us. So imagine if there was a way that you could expand that box, right? Like the box exists, we don't have control over that, but we can expand how they can demonstrate their understanding of the information in this box. And as teachers, you guys have that ability to do that. Yes, we have standards for a reason, but how you demonstrate your understanding of those standards are flexible. And just allowing them the options sometimes can make or break students' success. And it shows the students that you care and that you see them. My son cannot write well, but his teachers are amazing because they're like, he can do any academic assignment on his iPad. He can't talk, but they're like, once we gave him the iPad, he does reading comprehension questions. They even let him look at other people's assignments and he'll highlight which words are spelled wrong. Wow. He's very smart. But it takes teachers being intentional of not just saying like, I'm just gonna let him color so that he's here, right? I'm just gonna let him kind of sit in the corner because I know he can't do the work anyway. It takes teachers or academic people to say, let's try something different, right? And now he passes iLearn. Like he's amazing. So I think it's something everybody can play a part in making sure our students are successful. So this is Cordell. And one of the things I said when he was really, really young is that he has been through so much, this little amazing kid. And he is the happiest child. And it just really affirmed the resilience that our kids are. Like, imagine me, like, it's a struggle just being a minority, being a woman, being a person of color. But imagine everything is a barrier for you. And you still figure out a way to navigate the world in a way that you find peace and joy out of. And I used to always say, like, I'm never gonna change my son to fit into the world of this box, but I will change the world to accept people like him. Because he is not the problem. He's an amazing kid. And I'm sure you would say the same. Yeah. It's weird, the problems, if we're being honest, because we have all of these preconceived notions of who should exist in the world and what capacity. And so if we could expand our minds and our hearts, and I say I became a teacher, I don't really know why I became a teacher. I just happened to, but I always said if I became a teacher, I would want to be the type of teacher I would want my son to have.
Yeah, amen.
Because I know that anything is possible. Right? If you see them, if you believe in them, anything is possible. And so, of course, we cannot end, and then I'll leave it up for a few questions. There's like a video, it's short. So my son is nonverbal, and he obviously was not supposed to be able to walk, none of the above. He was on oxygen for his first 2 years of life. And my daughter, they're 6.5 months apart. And so he was crawling around, following around her everywhere. And one day, and I would like be careful, like, Cordell cannot walk, Courtney. And she was like, Mom, just watch. And she just kept saying, like, of course he can walk. And I would get frustrated because she would say, come on, Cordell. And I'm like, you know he can't get to you. Like, don't do that. And one day, and he would always just laugh. And I'm like, my first reaction is to like, you're making him feel bad, like he can't do it. And one day out of the blue, he literally just got up and started walking to her. And she was like, of course he can walk. You just have to show him. And in those moments, I'm like, I'm thinking one way, like kids like him can't walk. In her mind, because she's young, she's like, anybody can walk. Like anybody can walk. You just have to try. Right? And so my son, he's nonverbal. My younger son, Connor, who's 8, Cordell can't talk. And a few months, last year, Cordell was like, Mom, do you know, because I said something, I said, who called mom? He goes, you know that Cordell can talk? I go, no, he cannot talk, Connor. She goes, he says mom all the time because I showed him. I go, no, it's okay, Connor, it's fine. And he was like, Cordell, say mama. And then he looked around, he kind of covered his ears, and he was like, mama? I go, oh. And of course, after I fell apart, and my youngest son was like, Mom, you do know you teach kids to talk, right? And I'm like, I didn't think he could ever talk. He goes, well, because you have to teach them. And so for me, I always use those premises of like, I believe that given the right circumstances, support, and environment, any child can be successful. And what success looks like is different for every child. But given the right environment, supports, and any child can be successful. And so you guys are in an amazing position because you guys have so much access to these kids. Most times more than their parents, right? You have so much access to build relationships with these kids, to really transform not only how they see themselves, but transform how your world sees them. You have the ability to transform how your classroom sees people that are different, because everybody is different. But you have the ability to really change that entire trajectory of an entire group of students. So we're gonna end. I'll show you this cute little video, and then if you have any questions, comments. This was when he was born. He's my little peanut. His first time in snow. Such a hater. Yeah. But are there any questions, comments? Yep. So my youngest son